So my definition of what indigenous knowledge would be just knowledge that's been accumulated by people who've lived in an area for more than the last 50 years, whose roots are there, whose ancestries are there, whose culture evolved with them in that place, because we know that culture is attached oftentimes not just to people but to the places that they're from. There are areas such as the north coast of Alaska where we have hundreds of years worth of valuable information that's been passed down in various forms that can help inform people about the way that the climate has been in the past and the way that it's changing now. But in addition to that, we have a perspective, we have a way of processing that information that I think can be very helpful for other scientists. I'm saying other scientists because our people do science too and always have. It could be helpful for other scientists in understanding how to process that data and gather information from it. We've actually historically been very good at that because our lives have depended in many cases on being able to extract useful scientific information from our observations that can tell us how we're going to be able to live on this planet in the future.
I'm focused on the history of megadroughts in North America, particularly Western North America. What a megadrought is it's a drought that lasts for multiple decades. They're semi-continental in expanse, and what we're starting to appreciate from paleoclimate data and also pooled with the stories of the elders and also pooled with the research of the archaeologists is these droughts have hit recently in North America, these multi-decadal droughts, and they have broken basically the agricultural societies of the Native Americans in certain regions that were trying to make a living there. You just can't cope with them. You have to move, try something else, switch your lifestyle, or in many cases people died. I guess I've always been told and been aware of the fact that I'm Métis, that I have family members on both sides that are both from French origin and also from the Native community. I have colleagues who are non-Native in background, and I'd say they're as committed and as driven by it as I am. I guess for me it makes it so much more real. I get an emotional reward from it, but I think anybody who studies this very closely, they too will be captivated just by the human story of it. I mean, it sucks you in. And you start identifying and going, oh dear, what would I do? Or what would my family do?
I think many Indigenous people feel that they have been researched on and that they are universally tired of that. So that is something that I've noticed in many, most, if not all, conversations about Indigenous research. So the future is, the way forward I think is partnership, is acknowledging the contributions of Indigenous people appropriately and true partnership where both parties benefit. It's the relationship itself that's really the beneficial part, mostly the beneficial part. And then we will all be able to take some information, some knowledge away from that as well.
We record Indigenous perspectives on climate change for many reasons. There is one pragmatic reason, which is our scientific interest, which is that we are creating a record, first and foremost. I would say that it is very short-sighted vision that we immediately get something out of Indigenous observations. Long-term, what we are actually doing, we are creating the very same record that people who started establishing weather stations back in the early 1800s. It took decades of creating this database, and it took many decades in understanding how to analyze this database. What are we getting from the weather stations? But if you have a station for 2 years, it's no good. You cannot do anything with this. Same with Indigenous people data. So the first goal is create long-term standing records, or at least series of snapshots that can be compared in the long perspective. But then there is another very different reason, is that by documenting people's lives, just by asking them to keep diaries, we're documenting their culture, their daily life, which becomes an enormous heritage resource. This is something that they see very clearly, and that's why many of them are participating in this, and that's why they keep saying more and more, we're doing it not for you, as much as we like to work with you, Igor, we're doing it for our children. Years later, they will read how we lived, and they would compare it with how they live.
Working as a scientist interested in Indigenous knowledge, it's very important that I develop relationships. Our communities need to take the time to understand each other so that we can best go forward. As an example, I was told that the springtime weather in northern Canada was becoming very unusual. I thought I knew what springtime was, March, April. But for northern Canada, springtime meant June. It's just a small example of how our language, how we perceive the earth, can change based on our cultural experience. We need the relationships and the long-term partnerships to be able to really understand each other and make the most of what each group brings to the table. I think the scientific community was slow to really value the Indigenous perspective and Indigenous knowledge. In the last 10 years in particular, we scientists have come to realize that we are so much stronger if we go forward together with Indigenous cultures and Indigenous knowledge, identifying the right problems to address, understanding in a long historical context which of these changes we need to pay attention to.